Welcome for the first time. I'm Shelley Pryor. I'm a realistic watercolor artist in Ontario, Canada. And every week at 10 a.m. Wednesday, Toronto time, I go live and we do a little bit of watercolor together. So today we're going to be talking about doing a lovely river watercolor. And let's take a look. So this is the image I'm going to be working from here. What I really liked about this picture is the contrasts. I love the light on the far shore, the dark trees on the left. I like the clouds, the misty mountains in the background, but I really like this reflection. So I really wanted to get all of that included in today's demonstration. And we're going to begin with some of the drawing. So I'm going to, I don't know if I have no eraser, so here we go. All right, so first things first, bringing this back here for a second, I want to figure out where the horizon line is, and it looks to me to be about here. And I'm going to talk about the drawing process because you have said in past videos that you like seeing that part of it. So I am going to be talking about this, and I did get corrected on one thing last week. That my method of working out the proportions is in relation to my canvas size or my paper size. So yes, that is important if you're using my method. So first things first, I want to make sure that the format, like this is kind of a longer, skinnier picture, and I have a longer, skinnier book that I'm going to be working in. So the format will fit. If this is a square picture and I try to use this formula, I'm going to have obviously a very stretched out kind of image. So getting that out of the way means that I can go ahead and estimate where my horizon is here. So it's maybe a little more than a third of the way down. Now, I always do my drawing very lightly in the beginning with my pencil because watercolor does show everything through. It's transparent medium, and therefore we're going to see everything through. If you have a question as I'm going along, please do put it in capital letters for me. It just makes it a lot easier for me to glance up at the chat and spot it right away. So I appreciate that. And now I want to sort of break this down into, the basic shapes that I need. So over here, the top of the trees are here. Where the river edge is here. So if I've got my horizon line, I know that it's going to be up here somewhere and probably about here. Okay, I'm eyeballing it. Well, maybe not quite so high. Let's go a little lower there. And I am trying to figure out where I put my eraser. I don't have it, but I have another one right handy. Get it out of my container here. We're making a lot of noise rummaging around here, but I will use my kneaded eraser. Kneaded erasers are really good because they're soft enough and pliable enough that you can kind of just push it onto the paper and it lifts up the pencil. You can even, once you've softened it up in your hands and so on, you can even roll it over an area and lighten up all your pencil lines. So I'm just going to move this a little bit. I think I have it out of proportion slightly. You can also erase like a normal eraser. So they're very good to have. Now, the next thing I want to figure out is how far across is the end of that land there. So it's not quite halfway, but it's close. Okay, so this is halfway, I'm eyeballing it, then that's going to be approximately here. So that tells me that I can now figure out this shape. That's a pretty straight line there. Okay, so I've got my shape on the right sorted out. My horizon line's back here, so I'm looking at these mountains, and these are, you know, it's quite small, so it's not a lot of distance from the horizon line. And I really need to do this lightly because of the transparency and how much lighter I'm going to do these distant hills. This comes on a slight angle, this shoreline. And there's a little bit of a sandbar, or, you know, a little bit of marshy area right here in the middle. So I don't really need to draw that in. I just need the big shapes. Now we have this very prominent tree here, so I'm going to just sort of estimate the height. Okay, so it goes pretty close to the top, fairly close to the bottom as well. So it's definitely a prominent feature in this, especially since it's so dark. So I'm going to mark the bottom of the tree, the top of the tree. Now, that may have to move one way or another if, you know, if I kind of estimate where it's going to be. So if I come across here, my guess would be that that's approximately just a little shy of a quarter of the way across the page. So that's how I'm estimating where to put that tree and the size of it. Now, of course, in nature, you can always adjust these things. You know, it's not like we're building a streetscape where it's important to keep the proportions right, because they're man-made structures and they're very strict and measured out and things. But in nature, we have that. So that's where that tree's going to go. There's some smaller trees that don't quite reach the horizon, or just about around the horizon line here. And that's kind of a shape like this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so that you can see the picture at the same time. If you're looking for this reference picture, by the way, I did post a link to it under the description, in the description below the video. So this is these trees here. And then we have a little bit of a bank here. This was actually at a hotel that I stayed at, so this was quite lovely. And it's a very tailored hedge. So it's, you know, it's very man-made in the foreground here. But if you wanted to make this look a little bit more natural, this could be just grasses, bushes, whatever you wanted it to be. So this goes across kind of like that. And I have my basic shapes in place. So let's begin with our blues and our sky colors here. I'm going to be working on Arches 140 pound or 300 gram watercolor paper. Mine is cold press. It's a travel journal, which is 6 by 10 inch or 15 by 25 centimeters. So I will erase, however, the horizon line wherever I'm going to have my trees, because I don't want to line through my trees. I don't want to line through my mountains. The horizon line is, or the eye level, is basically your guideline for what's above your eye level, what's below your eye level, because that can change perspective in what you're doing. But I don't actually need to see that line in my finished painting. So I'm going to start out with a big flat synthetic brush, and I've got 2 water containers here and some paper towel. Now my little travel palette here is it's just an old eyeshadow, or not an old eyeshadow, but I went to the dollar store and I got an eyeshadow, and I took out the eyeshadow, I put in my paints. These are mostly Da Vinci watercolors, which is what I often use. And I just use the lid for mixing. So that's what I'm going to use today because it's easier for me to keep it all on camera. But I'd like to try and treat this as though I were actually painting it on location. I was part of a tour. This is in England. This is in Ireland, and we literally were getting on the bus. So I snapped this picture with the idea of painting it later. So my blue, this blue to me looks like it's kind of a cobalt blue. Now I used to have ultramarine blue in this well, but now I've changed it to cobalt because I was running out of my ultramarine. So this is cobalt blue. And I'm always going to be blotting my brush just for water control. But I'm going to start this by painting in the blue sky. I don't need to worry about the tree because, of course, it's really dark. I do need to worry about these yellow trees, though. The trees are actually green-ish, but they look quite golden because the sun was just coming up, and it was coming in this direction, and it made all of those trees look golden. So it's that early morning glow that we're going to get here. I'm going to start in with my sky. I'm going to just lightly soften a few edges as I go along here. So I'm putting in some really wet color, but I'm looking at that sort of angle that the clouds come in here. Then I'm rinsing my brush, giving it a blot, and I want to come in and soften up these edges. Now, as I'm softening this, what I'm doing is I'm running the brush flatwise along that edge, and you see that edge starts to really get quite soft. I'm just going to come in with a bit more color because one thing I do know about watercolors, it's going to dry a lot lighter. So this is going to give me the color value that I need. Now along the top of the trees here, we have the same sort of thing. We've got some, this cloud kind of comes in. I'm going to rinse my brush, give it a blot, and run that along that wet paint. And catching it while it's wet is of utmost importance. I'm going to soften both edges here because somewhere in these trees I'm going to have ins and outs, like value or height changes. And when the height changes, I want to have some of that blue sky showing through, but I don't want hard lines. So that's why I really want to make sure I'm not creating a hard line. So put down wet color, blot your brush, and then soften. The other alternative is to put down, like to wet the paper and then put the color on the wet paper. But personally, I find that always lightens up the color just a little too much for my liking. Now, some of these clouds, like this color's creeping down a little bit here. So I'm going to use my paper towel wrapped around my finger, and I'm going to lift out a little bit more cloud. Just going to run my finger wrapped with paper towel and get some of these edges softened up a little bit. Now the bottom of this cloud, I think it could use a little bit more oomph. So I'm going to take this blue, I'm going to add just the smallest amount of permanent rose to it, just so it's a little bit different than the sky color. And I'm going to repeat what I did underneath the cloud. Okay, I don't want to have the hard edges. I don't want to start blotting before I've softened up these edges. So I'm blotting my brush, soften the edges. And then I'm going to take my paper towel once again. You can see what I blotted off before. And I'll soften up some of these edges. I'm not going to choose all of them to soften, but I can get a little bit of sort of cloud texture in this, and I'm not pressing hard here. I'm just pressing lightly. Might even do a little bit more up here. And that gives me a fairly natural looking cloud. So I think I'm okay with my sky right now. I'm going to hold off doing the water because the water is going to be one step. It's going to have to include the trees and everything. So in order for me to do that part of it, I want to have the trees done first before I do the water. So I'm going to do the distant mountains here. The sky color was cobalt blue. And no need to apologize. It is cobalt blue. Now I want to talk about these mountains back here because they're kind of done in layers. There's a dark hazy one back here. That's probably where the cloud is casting a shadow on that hillside. But otherwise, we've got this very faded color back here. Yes, they are kind of green, a little bit brown, and so on, but it's faded. So I want to make sure that when I'm doing this part of it, the mountainous part, that I'm keeping my paint thinner because I really want that to look pushed back into the distance. I want to create that whole perspective thing. So I need a little bit of green, a little bit of, well, it's kind of that, it's almost this cloud color, but a little bit darker there. So I'm going to stick with some of these blues. I'm going to put a little red in it. But I also need some green. So green, I'm just going to take a little bit of, this is Areolan yellow. I'm going to take a little bit of that and create a little bit of a green mixture there. So I've got a little bit of kind of a purple color and a little bit of green. So my paint's fairly diluted here. You can see my puddle's not very dark. And I'm going to just come in on dry paper and create the feeling of these distant hills. I'm ignoring the trees in the foreground because I can easily put those on top. If it's darker, it's not going to be an issue for me. Now let's get a little bit of that blue, kind of blend it into my green there a little bit. So I'll just make a little bit more. I'm going to take just a little bit of this and come in here. Notice I'm using still using this large brush. I'm using the chisel edge so that I can create sort of those longer, slender lines, but I'm trying to follow the direction of the mountain as well. So it's got to follow this this angle where it comes across. All right, but really quite faded. It's value-wise, it's not that different from the sky. So it's almost, aside from this little bit of dark shadow from the cloud, it's almost hard to distinguish from the sky. There we go. Very, very simple. No, not going to get into any of the details. I can hint at some of these little dark trees here in the foreground. I'll just use a small brush for that. So I'll use I'm going to use a liner brush for this. This is like a number 2 rigger that I've got. It doesn't have to be a rigger, but it's just what I've grabbed. So I'm going to take this a little bit darker, my green. Don't want to have too much yellow in it. That implies sun, so I'm going to put some more blue in it. Now that to me looks like it's a little bit too bright. And I'm going to dull it. So if I have a green and I need to dull it, one of the easiest ways to do that is to go with the complement. The complement for green is red. So I'm going to grab some of that permanent rose. Just put a little bit in, not too much, just a little. And that'll be enough to put in a few little hints of dark trees here. And they're just basically dabbles. I'm not going to get hung up. If I start putting a ton of detail here, all of a sudden what's going to happen is my eye's going to start gravitating to the distance instead of the foreground. So just a little hint of it. But I think I might even want to soften that because my paper's already dry. So I'm just going to rinse and blot my brush. And let's soften that a little bit. Just dabbing at it with this brush. That just makes it a little bit soft, that edge. I'm not really pulling off the color, just a little softening. A little goes a long way. Now, other than that, we have this distant shore. I know it's very hard to see on the screen because it's very small, but there's a little bit of brown on the edge of the shore, much like what we see here on the edge of the shore where the trees are. So I'm going to use some burnt sienna here. Really thin it down because I don't want to suddenly put a dark line in there. I just need a very light value. Let's test this out. It might be still, could use that a little bit thinner. And of course, as it goes further down the river, it will start to get a little bit smaller. And then we have this sandbank area in the middle. So I'm just going to put that in there because that's dry land. That doesn't have anything to do with the reflection. So I'm putting this in now. I'm just going to blot some of this off just because I know the trees are going to go there. But really diluted color. You can see the light value of this. So everything that I start with in covering my paper begins with light values. Then I'll start building up darker values, and ultimately I'll get to my very darkest areas and my foreground where the trees are. So let's take, and I might use a little bit of this green, but I'm going to take that brown off there for now. And I definitely need some yellows in here. That's this yellow here, this areolin that I'm using. It's obviously way too vibrant, right, for that. But I do still need to maintain some of that gold. So I'm going to use a little raw sienna with it, warm it up. That's feeling a little better. So I'm going to use the combination of the raw sienna and aureolin plus some of the greens that I saved from doing the background. So let's just block this in. And you see, I'm still using this big brush. I'm not going to get bogged down with minor details at this point. I just need to block in these big areas. Now, as I put this color down, I'm putting it down generously so that I am having enough paint on the paper that's going to stay wet long enough for me to actually be effective in adding in some of the greens. So now into some of the greens, and we'll just hint at some of that. And let some of those colors just melt into each other. I want to make sure my brush isn't wetter than the paper, though. This is where it's so easy to run into trouble, because you can suddenly have a blossom because your brush was wetter than the paper was. There's a little bit of green at the top of this tree, and all I'm using is the corner of this brush to indicate a few little sprigs of foliage there, and indicate the sky that's peeking through. I would love to be able to teach this in multiple languages. Unfortunately, my language skills are somewhat limited. So, but I do want to use perhaps a little bit of a reddish color in there. So I'm going to use a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm using burnt sienna because I don't want it overly red. My burnt sienna's got a little bit of redness to it, but I just popping it a little bit right there. Now I was a little bit too wet. This is going to make a bit of a blossom. I'm really not too concerned about that. I will come back in and I'm going to add a little bit of texture and so on, and that will certainly disguise any blossoms. But last week, if you might recall, I did show you how to deal with some blossoms. So now I'm going to use more of the burnt sienna to create that shoreline here where the sand, it kind of looks like sand. It's kind of a sandy shore here. Okay, a little cartoonish at this stage, right? So this is something that always kind of throws you off at this stage of your painting. Is you look at it and you think, oh, I don't know, this is going to really work out. But remember, if we're going to be adding in other things, this isn't the final step, right? So many times we judged our painting based on this stage. This is the ugly stage. Now, before I can do, before I get into any of the detail there, I still have white paper to cover. So I want to do this water, the actual river here, because now I have some gold. I have the blue, that all of that's going to be reflected in the water here. There's going to be a few darks in here. This all has to be done all simultaneously. This has to be done in one step, because if I were to put it on there and then re-wet and so on, everything's going to start mushing together, and I will get a much nicer result if I do it in one step. So one step is what I'm aiming for on the water. So I need to have my colors ready, and I think I'm going to get a little bit bigger palette just for this. I've got my lid. I can use a lid. Here we go. I'll use a lid. I'll improvise. rather than run across my studio. So I'm going to go with some cobalt blue. I need to have enough paint mixed up. Don't want to run short when you are doing something like this. And I will need a little bit more of that yellow. So that was Aureolin, bright yellow, plus raw sienna. And I'll use a little bit of that green as well. I might mix a little bit more of that green just to be on the safe side here. Now, I just made a mistake. If you're thinking, well, I haven't even touched the paper. How could I make a mistake? Here's my mistake. I just mixed this green puddle, and it's really watery. If I'm going to wet my paper first, I don't want a really watery mix. So that can be a problem for me when I'm actually applying the color. So we don't really think about these things as we're mixing up color, but how thick or thin the mixture is can be really relevant in how it goes onto, especially if you're using wet on wet technique. So what I'll do is I'm just going to take this mix and just use a smaller brush, less water in my brush, just take the more of the pure paint here. Now you'll see as I'm building this up why this is so important. I think I just used too much yellow. Yes, I did. So rather than going into my bucket here, I'm just going to go wipe off my brush. That way my brush isn't holding too much water and I end up with the same result where I have a big wet puddle. Okay, now we need to dull that. I'm going to take a little red, mix that in, and you can see that that's a drier mixture. Now, blue, we have a big area. I don't mind that being a little bit thinner, but I still want to have enough body in the paint so that when I'm working on wet, it won't go out of control or it won't create blossoms, because I know the dark is going to be one of the last things I add. So I just need to ask you, have you been guilty of this in your painting? Have you thought about how wet your puddles are? Because that can be a complete game changer in improving your watercolor. And I don't say that lightly, because for me that was a huge deal, that when I learned the right consistency, that changed everything for me. So now I'm going to take this bigger brush again, and I'm going to dampen this whole area. Right to the shore here. Now, the thing about working in one of these books is it's bound to curl, and I don't have my clips handy either. I guess I'm not very prepared today, but I don't have my clips handy, but we'll just do what we can. I'm trying not to hit that sandbar that I did earlier. I'll just hit a little bit of this little bit on the other side. And I'm leaning to one side to see the shine on the paper. Make sure I haven't missed spots. All right. Now, I didn't come that neatly up around the sandbar. I'll do that with my color when I'm starting it to add my color in. But I'm going to begin with my blues. I'm using a smaller brush here so that I can control it. Now, again, I don't want my brush or my paint too wet because I want it to land and sort of stay in certain places. I just want to do it on wet so everything sort of melts together and gives me soft edges. So it looks like there's a flow in the river here where there's this kind of directional line that comes across. And this is where, you know, even though I didn't wet with water all the way up to the sandbar, I'm going to take the color up to it. And I can be fairly strong with my color just because I already know that this is going to dry a lot lighter. Ignoring the trees on the left still. I still see enough of my lines that I can complete this, but not pressing hard or anything like that. Coming up into that little channel. Okay, the prominent color. The prominent color is down here at the bottom. So I'm going to add a little bit more color. Oh dear, I can feel the paper drying. So I'm going to take my damp brush, not wet, just damp, and help this along. Don't be aggressive with that, just a little bit of extra moisture added in before it's fully dry is going to extend your time. So coming in with more color here. Now I'm cleaning out my brush because I've got to jump right into that yellow. And that's going to start melting downward. I think I used a little bit more yellow this time, so I'm going to put in a bit more of the raw sienna. And this is going on wet too. Now let's come in with that drier green. Okay, so the drier green is going to allow me to do things like bringing these darks up through some of these areas. And it's not going to spread out of control because that can make something muddy or messy right off the bat. So that's this drier paint on a damp surface because it's only damp now, right? It's not wet anymore. Now, what if you run out of time? Okay, like I'm running out of time. And the reason I say that is because I can feel the paper wants to dry. So I think maybe I'll just let it dry. I could take a brush and kind of dampen that again, but I run the risk of smearing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dry this. Should the blue of the sky cool the colors that are reflected in the water? Should the blue of the sky cool? Oh, I see what you're saying. I do need to darken a few things here. So I am drying this and I will be able to sort of re-wet and continue. And I will build up the darks. You can see that the reflection is actually a little bit darker than the you know, what's out of the actual trees. Okay, let that get back to room temperature. Oh, it's a little bit, still a little damp on the edge here. You can see my paper really is curling now, but if I dry the back side, that will kind of come back a little bit. Okay, it's too hot for me to proceed, but yes, all of this, that's one of the things that always happens when you work wet on wet. Things always turn out a lot lighter. This is why I like doing wet on dry, more like I did in the sky here. I actually do think that the sky and the water do need to be a little darker. So I think I'm going to build that up a little bit, including the sky. This was cobalt blue I'm using. Rinsing my brush, giving it a blot, soften the edges. Now I kind of lost those nice shapes on the clouds. So what I'm going to do is going to take a clean paper towel once again. I'm just going to basically repeat. And it's just going to add a little bit more interesting volume to my clouds here. Okay, so my sky's a little stronger, and then I can take some clean water and so that I can build up down here in the actual reflection. Really using a light touch. I don't want to, I've already reactivated the color. So as I build up more color, I'm going to go a little darker. I'm going to put a little burnt sienna into this so that this reflection ends up a deeper, slightly deeper color. I like the variations in there, and I know I haven't really done anything above the water yet, but I'm going to come in and just add a little bit more depth to some of this. I feel like that green could be a little duller. It's looking a little bit too bright. But I am concerned about a hard line there, so I'm just going to take my brush and do a very, very gentle tap tap with a damp blotted brush. And you'll see me sometimes, like I'm mostly working in this direction, but you'll see me sometimes work this way with the chisel edge of my brush. And that's just to give a little bit of that surface motion in the water, or in the reflection here. damp brush. Just a little smear. And I'm using the most delicate touch here just to get that to blend slightly. And this is still wet. I think I can add a little bit more blue here. Smaller areas require a less loaded brush. Otherwise you'll find that it'll travel out of control. So I'm just putting a little less in my brush if I'm working in a small area. Okay, so let's just do a couple of little strokes, horizontal strokes this direction with my brush to indicate the slightest motion in the water. I don't want a lot. I don't want to pull a big streak. I just want a very gentle ripple here. This was early morning, and there's not a lot of motion in the water, so I just want the slightest hint of it. Is it possible to straighten out the paper with an iron? Yes, you can do that. You can also mist the back and press it with, you can have paper towels, but that's a little hard to do in a book. I could actually, if it was a big concern to me, I would, just spray the back, put paper towel here, paper towel on top, lay some books on it, and it should flatten out. I would have to leave them for a long time, but yeah, you could iron. I have seen people do that. Do I ever sign and sell my blotting tissue? I should, right? Actually, I've had some paper towel that looks really quite lovely, quite beautiful abstracts. Just checking to see what size flat brush am I using and brand. Oh, this one, I think this, it's almost worn off. I think this, it's number 10. And this is the same brand. So let me see if I can read this one a little better. It's too worn off. I can't really read it. But it's a green handle brush, and this big one is a 3/4 inch, and this one's a number 10. The brand isn't really all that important, to be honest. This is synthetic hair. It says plaid. Might be Donna Dewberry. I don't know. I've had these brushes for decades, so I'm not even sure if they're available anymore. But okay. So I'm starting to establish that beautiful reflection here, and I need to start thinking about the value corrections and maybe some of the detail, but the value corrections is what I'm after right now. So value corrections, what I mean by that is this dark enough or light enough? Is this dark enough or light enough? All of that type of thing is what I'm asking myself at this point. I don't want to start getting bogged down with details and things like that, and only to find out that, oh, this is too light. What's going on here? This actually has to be a little darker. So I'm going to take that burnt sienna. The burnt sienna actually looks a little bit orange. So I'm just going to steal a little bit of that cobalt and mix it in so that it's just a little bit more of a dull brown. So remember, it needs to be thin. And I'm just going to come in here and darken up this whole sandbar. I don't mean dark, I just mean a little darker. So that it's obvious that this is above the water and that it is darker than the water. I would do the same thing on this far shore here. All right, when that's a little drier, I can come in with a little bit of a line to show that extra dark right there. Maybe some of the extra dark back there. When I would do that on dry. And I am working on dry, but I don't want to, if I did it right now, it would just blend right in. It wouldn't be a hard line, so I have to wait. This one is dark enough, but I think it could be a little duller. So I'm going to take a little bit of that blue and just glaze a little bit of that blue in there so it's not quite so reddish brown. It's just a little duller, a little bit more of a toned down brown. Now obviously my trees are looking a little bit weird. They're a little bit too light. I'm going to lift a little color here and there, but I want to build up some of the color up in here. Now, how am I going to do that? Well, I think I'm going to take a smaller round brush. This is what is this? A 6. And I'm going to do a little bit of dabbling. So I'm going to take some of this color. I kind of made the edge of that a lot straighter than it's supposed to be, but we'll go with it. And I'm just going to dabble in with a fairly dry brush. I didn't really put it in my water. And I'm just kind of scumbling, so just sort of swirling my brush to get a little bit of sort of natural texture. Those little blossoms that I got, they're not affected. They're pretty much getting hidden by all this texture. So it's darkening it a little bit, but it's not adding a lot of dark. Now, depending on the kind of paper you have, sometimes you get a paper and it's got a prominent waffle pattern to the paper texture, and then it makes it a little bit strange in your trees. So if that's the case, you might choose an alternate way of creating some texture. So an alternate way might be, let me just see if I can find it. I'm looking for what I call a smash brush. So this brush actually started out like this one. Like these two brushes are kind of the same, but you can see one's in good condition and one's in terrible condition. And what I've done is I've just kind of done this to my brush. And really, you get paint. I think this was an acrylic brush, and it got lots of paint built up in the ferrule. And, then now it's good for this. So I could take some of that color and kind of just dabble it on there. And now I have just kind of an overall texture. It's just so that the trees don't look completely flat. Now let me zoom in. Sorry, hit something there. I'm going to zoom in just so you can see the texture, because I know it's really hard to see otherwise. Will it focus that close? It's trying. Here, let me put my hand there. Maybe that'll help. Yeah, so now you can see the texture on the paper. And this one, the left side, I started by just scumbling with kind of the side of my brush, just skipping the highlights on the paper texture. And over here, I used the Smash brush. Please don't Google Smash brush. You'll never find it. I don't think they make a brush called Smash brush. This is just one I created by smashing it up. So this one is just a pounce type of technique. Now you can see this doesn't look very good, but since I'm working in this area and I'm already zoomed in, let's talk about the build-up here. So I want to think about separating some of these trees because it's all one big solid mass at the moment. So let's talk about separating some of these trees. And the way that I can do that is to take a flat brush, a little bit more color. Let's take a little bit more of this color. And I'm going to, let's get that a little wetter. I'm going to put in some color here, and I'm going to just sort of draw a curving line. Rinse my brush, blot it, and blend in the line. Now I didn't do a very good job there. I need to mix a little more color, so just bear with me for 1 second here so I can get a little bit more color. This is raw sienna mostly, a little bit of yellow, and maybe a little bit of that burnt sienna. So okay, so I've got my flat brush here. I'm just going to use the corner of it, and I'm going to give a wiggly line that curves like that. Rinse my brush and give it a blot. And then this side, I'm going to blend in. So that's like making like negative painting, right? And I'm going to do a little bit more of that. Just the corner of my brush. Or you could use 2 separate brushes if that's easier for you. Rinse my brush and give it a blot. Let me bring my towel over here so you can see I'm blotting my brush, and blend that out. Now you might want to blend a little bit on the other side as well, but it's just separating those clusters of trees. This one I might do a little bit more reddish because it's a little bit more of a reddish tree here. So it's kind of a wiggly line, and it's not too not too connected or perfect, that's for sure. But if I do enough of this and then soften the left side, you'll see when one tree is tucked in behind another one. And of course, when we're looking at this sort of angle that we're looking at, we can do this. It's if you're looking directly into a group of trees, you might approach it a little bit differently, but this will work pretty well. And some of the trees are going to be a little darker towards the bottom. So put the color down wet enough that it actually that you have the time to rinse and blot and blend, and the texture is still staying. I'm still seeing enough of the texture. I don't need to see a lot of it anyway, but that just gives me a little bit of something to work with so that I can see tree separation. Rinsing my brush, giving it a blot, and softening this edge. Okay, so that's starting to look like I have more trees now, but it's not the full detail, that's for sure. I want to do some of this with some greens now. I want to come in and start indicating a few little bits of green. So I've switched to a round brush, that number 6, and I want to do a few little hints of sort of shadowy greens in here. So I think we'll put a little more red in, and just to make it a bit darker and a bit duller. And you can take any of this and also do a little softening. You don't have to soften every edge, but a few edges is always a good way to help connect light shadows or light values to dark values, the transitions. It also will not draw too much attention if you're putting like a ton of contrast in here. It's not going to draw all the attention to this spot. Now I do need to obviously spread this around a little bit more and get more of a a spattering of this type of thing. There's definitely some down here, and this is where it kind of connects into the reflection, right? So if you put something in your reflection, you want to make something that sort of matches above that area. But that looks silly by itself. So that's where the softening comes in. Still think it's too green. I'm going to add some more red again. And there's a lot of little spots under the tree, under these trees, where you see the shadow, where the foliage comes right down to the shore. That was a little more than I wanted, so I'll just pull that off. But just little bits along the shore here, under the trees. There's some darker shadows up in the upper parts of the trees too. But these little bits of green shadow, darker, duller green shadow, they're kind of spattered throughout. I need to get a little more mixed here. Bear with me. Having a little trouble getting the mix here. Okay, I think I got a good dark green now. All right, so I'm going to come in with even more darks in a few areas, and I'm going to blot this and just sort of dabble in. See how dry my brush is? When it can make those kinds of scratchy type of marks. That's good for your detail, not a wet brush. So your brush is it starts off wetter, in your first layers, and then gradually you're working your way to a drier and drier and drier brush as you're coming into your details and deepening your values. Now, when you're seeing it this close, it looks kind of strange. It's the zoom out effect that makes it all work. But I'll build lots of layers here to get the trees built up. I may need to even darken my shadow a little bit more. See how dry that brush is. Boy, oh boy. Now I can take that same brush and take some of my, like my raw sienna with areolin. I can take my yellows and create even more textures up here along the top and things like that. Just lots of dabbling. I could make this really simple, but I just feel like fussing today. You know, some days you just feel a little bit more patient with things. And I kind of like the feeling there. Blot some of it off if it's too much. But I want to be careful not to lose all the lightness of those first layers. The lightness of those first layers is what makes this feel like it's in the sun. How do I do my dark green? I take cobalt blue, areolin, that makes my green, which is a bright green. Less water to make it darker, but sorry, I'm not on screen here. Less water, but it's cobalt blue, areolin. And then I'll take a little bit of one of my reds. So I could take my permanent rose, for example. And when I blend that in, it dulls it down. But the real secret to getting it dark is not using that much water. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm zoomed in a little bit too close, I think. So you can start to feel the zoomed out effect. But you can see this dark green looks pretty dark there, and not unnatural, right? So the adding of the red will make that feel a lot more natural. But as I zoom out, things do feel a little bit more realistic, I guess. They don't look like it up close, that's for sure. Hardly touching the paper, and my brush is quite dry. Like I almost have to work to get some of this off of my brush. What do you think? A little more in the water? I think it needs a little bit more darkening. So let's make our comparison. Okay, and you're probably wondering, well, what about these light tree trunks? Well, I'm going to add that in with white. I'm not going to try and paint around those. I'm just going to add that in with white, or actually I'm going to mix my white and put that in there. But yeah, I can see immediately, oh, this green's too bright. It needs to be a lot duller, right? So, but my wet on wet is dry. That's okay. You can wet it again, and you might be wondering, well, why are you starting way over here? Why don't you just do that area? You can't do just a patch in a wash. You have to do all of it. If you do just a patch, you will see it, and it will look like a patch. So I'm coming in here. So I wet all the blue areas. Now I'm going to wet the yellow areas. And I'm doing it that way because I don't want to blend it back and forth. That's just going to transfer the color. So I'm coming in with more wash here, or more water. Oh, I missed a big area right in the middle. Missed an area over here, rinsing my brush. Let's just... Okay, so I'm looking, I don't know if you can see me leaning over, but I'm looking for that satiny shine. And I want to put a few more of those darks in here. I'm going to add a little bit more red to my green just to get that a little bit duller. And you can see that that's dulled it, darkened it, all that good stuff. Just generally a little too yellow over here. So yeah, that's getting things a little bit darker. I'm going to take my smaller flat brush again. Just do a little bit of this horizontal strokes just to show a little motion in the water, not big long ones. That is an effective way of showing a water surface, especially if it's like glass, but there is just the slightest bit of motion in this water, and I want to portray that. So I want to get this little bit of this sideways blurring effect. There we go. So it's a reflection, almost like that, you know, mirror type of reflection, because the water's still enough. If there was a lot of motion in the water, you would not see, you wouldn't see the reflection as clearly. It would be a little bit more sorry, it would be a little bit more white in those areas because you wouldn't see the reflection. Too much motion on the surface. Okay, no more questions. So I'm just going to, I think I'm just going to take my towel or my dryer and dry this. I feel like I'm not awake today. Having a bit of a sleepy day, I guess. I have a little bit of a blossom up here in my sky. I don't worry about it, but I can show you how I would handle that. It always feels like the thing you should do is to deal with it right away. And sometimes that is the case. But if it's semi-dry, you just got to wait for it to dry. So if I want to get rid of that little blossom, let's just show this. I'm going to rinse and blot my brush. Ooh, better clean that out a little better, right? Okay, clean brush. Clean part of my paper towel. And what I'm going to do is just touch the dark part of the blossom and blot. Just the very tip of my brush. The constant blotting is the part that will repair the problem. If you just keep working to wet it, you're just going to soften up the paint too much, and it will create a ring around it. So you just want to blot or dampen that excess color, right? That's where it's built up, the extra blue in this spot. So I'm only hitting that. Blot. You can usually disguise it pretty well in such a small thing. I mean, I probably wouldn't be bothering with this really, but if it's troubling you and you cannot get away from that, you know, you're a perfectionist or whatever, this is something that you can do. And all of this is very gentle. I'm barely touching the paper, but constantly blotting. And you really are not, like, you can see the part that I did. I'm not going to continue on, but you know, you can make a wash look a lot smoother if you are working on a cotton paper and do this very gently. I mean, it's a little bit like brain surgery because it's very tedious, but back to the rest of our project. I'm going to am I happy with what I've got? Because if I do anything in the foreground, if I start putting this tree in, I'm done. I can't go back to anything in my background. I have to get all of this lighter background complete before I do that. So I can take my little value isolator squares. I don't really have a name for them, but the little squares with the holes. And I can double check at this point. Am I ready? I don't know. Let's check it out and see. There's something that happens at this stage of your painting that can be very misleading. You can think, oh, that's dark enough, because you're seeing it against this white here. We haven't got the darks in the picture yet. So I have to figure out whether or not I actually am dark enough or I just think I'm dark enough. So to double check, you can put the square in the same place on both pieces. I'm a little bit light. I wouldn't say drastically so. Let's check the hillside. Once again, I think I'm too zoomed in, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Let's check this part here. I'm a little bit lighter. Okay, this is the part that I wanted to know about. Yeah, and what I'm concluding here is that I'm overall lighter than the picture, which makes all of this come into balance. Let's check this this distant hill here. Okay, let's put it in that spot and that spot. Pretty close there. And the trees. Let's check the trees. Okay, so I'm pretty much on the money for the trees. But if I want a more dynamic painting, I might go the extra mile and darken up some of this even further. So do I want to go the extra mile, or do you want do you want me to go for it, or do you want me to carry on so you can see the end of this and get on with your day? You guys let me know. I seem to be getting a little bit muddy after going over the hill and trees. Otherwise, it looks good so far. Over the hill and trees. Muddy. Here? Oh. I'm not sure, Carol, I'm not sure, Carolyn, I'm not sure if I know what you mean. Seem to be getting a bit muddy after going over the hill and trees. Otherwise looks good so far. So if you re-wet, I'm guessing, maybe that's what you said? Okay, I got one go for it. All right. I don't know. Sometimes I don't know. Am I dragging on too long these days? I don't want to be like, that certain someone who rambles, but let's put a little bit more darkness in the sky and in the water. I think this blue really sets off the yellow, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to go in with more blue. This is cobalt blue. Whoops, that's going to... You see what I did there? To keep that from dripping down, I tipped my paper. It's because the paper's really curled. And so I tipped it in the other direction so it wouldn't run down. All right, so I'm going to take this and just tap along the edge here so I get some of those interesting cloud shapes. Okay, so that's definitely darker. I don't want it to drip down though, so I think I'm just going to quickly dry this. Look how much lighter it gets as it dries. Okay, this is going to be my last go at the the water here because I really want to get this finished up. So I'm going to wet the areas where there's more blue in the water. I'll do that first because I don't want to turn all of this green, right? I don't want to transfer any of this blue paint over into the green or into the yellow reflection. So wet all this. Probably going to have to darken that sandbar again. And now I'll do the yellow area. Okay, so I've got puddles in some areas and dry patches in others. So I need to redistribute some of this water. And when I'm doing this, I'm hardly touching the paper. If I aggressively brush back and forth, that's just going to get me into a lot of trouble. So I have to treat it like it's nitroglycerin, right? Just nice light touch. All right, so we need to have more blue, or more green, I should say. So mixing my green, not too much water because I want to have control. A little bit of red added, it's going to dull that down. I think I'll even grab some of that burnt sienna. Put that in there. All right, so a little bit more darkening here. Try to replicate the any of the darks that I put in the actual upper areas. I think that's going to give me a lot more dark there. I also want to get my blue in here. Let's get my blue. I almost forgot that. More of the cobalt. Get this area deeper to match the sky above. Okay, I think that's getting better for sure. Getting bolder now, getting more green in there. Hopefully I don't go too far. Now I'm going to rinse and blot my brush. Get a little bit of the motion back. And I'm feeling that that's looking a little bit more like my reference. There we go. All right, so I think I'll just dry this and we can get on with our foreground. Now, I think that's got a lot more impact now. Now, I didn't go so far as to put extreme detail in this far shore. Definitely didn't put it back here. But the amount of detail as you get closer helps to create that perspective as well. But I do have one more thing I have to do before I move on from this, and that is to get those tree trunks in. So I'm going to use a little bit of white. Now this is, I actually have some, what they call buff white, titanium buff, I think it's called. And it's like an opaque color, and it is off white. So it's not a cold white, it's a warm white. And I just have a blob of it stuck in the top of my lid. So in case you're wondering why I opened a jar of bleed-proof white and I'm calling it something else, that's why. It's because I've got this big blob of this warm white stuck to the lid of my jar. So I can come in and add in my tree trunks. I can probably find the tube of paint that I'm using here, but it is quite an opaque color. A couple of those. I'll probably put a little bit of shadow around those as well. Actually, I was using a rather large brush for that detail, but I'm going to take a smaller brush and just put a few smaller branches through here. And it's really hard to see it on this light yellow. You really see it where the greens are. And I can shade this with, if I take some burnt sienna and cobalt blue, it makes a dark brown. And I can actually put a shadow on some of this if I want. Just on the right side to show the edge of the tree, the shadow side of the tree. Do I date my paintings in my sketchbook? Yes, I do. Do I always remember? No, but yeah, I typically will do that, and I'll show you what I did yesterday, and you can take a look. But after I'm done this, so you have to stick around to the end if you want to see yesterday's effort. So I'm going to take some of that brown, and I'm going to hint at some of the edge of this bank here, and even the distant shore. I can put a little hint or two of that dark along that that edge of the water there. Truthfully, this was a river that fed into the ocean, I believe, because the tide went out, which exposed this sandbar. All right, so foreground. Let's talk about the this man-made hedge here, and I'm thinking I'd like to change that a little bit, and maybe just make that look a little bit more like natural landscape, rather than having it look like a tailored hedge. So again, I'm going to need a lot of green. Since I need a lot of green, I'm going to take a shortcut here. I'm going to use some sap just because it's faster. But, you know, I don't always use just sap. I'll usually shift it one way or another. I find even sap green doesn't look all that natural, so I'll put a little raw sienna in it. And I'm going to, see, even that looks a little too bright for me, so I'm going to put some more raw sienna in. And I'm just going to fill in this area. I'm going to take a flat brush because I wasn't getting enough mileage out of the little round. So that's sap and raw sienna. Could use a little more water here. I like kind of dabbling it on because it gives a little bit of irregularity to the lighter areas. I'm not really not looking for a perfect wash here because I know it's something that's going to be really textured. I also don't want the brightest, cleanest green even in this area, because although this is foreground, it's not got a lot of light on it. It gets a little more light on the right-hand side perhaps, but overall this is not in direct sun, not like these trees here. There, now I can use the chisel edge of my brush and pull up some natural looking grasses. Out of this foreground area. So I've turned it into grasses instead of, rather than a hedge. But I want to put some variations in there. So I'm going to put my sap green. I'm going to grab some red and put that in there and darken this down. Maybe even a little burnt sienna. It's got enough red in it. But the red will tone down that green and give us a much darker green. So I still have a lot of that sort of deeper green at the bottom. That gives you what's called visual weight. So the visual weight makes it feel like, you know, this light area isn't just going to float away. It gives it something to sort of anchor it to the bottom of the page and not give that funny float away feeling. You can do things like throw salt in and do all these different techniques for texture. I'm just doing a little bit of working with the chisel edge of my brush to create some longer grasses. Keep hitting the next page that isn't painted yet, so I'm just going to lift this up a bit. There actually is kind of a weed of some kind here. I think that's kind of interesting. This little something here, like a little branch or something. So actually it was quite a decline, like a decline here. So I think that might be actually another bush or a tree or something. And so I kind of like it. I'm just going to hint at something here with my rigger brush. There, just a little something. I'm going to put another one because it looks a little too in the middle. So I'm going to put another one to balance it off and make it feel not so in the middle. Right? Just kind of, it's almost funny how that kind of pulled that over. So compositionally, I just felt that needed to be moved over. Would white gouache do the same thing for the tree trunks? Sure it would, yeah. You could, and you can even tint it with a little bit of warm color, like maybe a burnt sienna or something like that. Mix a little bit of that in, if you're using a white gouache. But yeah, gouache will work. Now I have my my trees here in the foreground. Now there's something I'm noticing about, there's these trees here, this one here. We've got this one with the wiggly branches here on the left hand side, and then we've got this coniferous tree in the front, fir type tree. It's actually lighter than the one behind, so that tells me that I should paint this one first, which is weird, right? It's kind of weird because, well, it would be a lot easier to put it on top. There is an alternate way, though. Because it's similar in color, I could lift out these branches on that darker tree. And that might be an easier way to go. So I think that that's probably the approach I'm going to take. But behind that, or actually maybe this is in front as well. But I'm going to put this one in, this dark sort of triangular mass here. And then I'll go from there. So I'm going to take, I need a dark green. So I'm going to use a green, it's called Perylene green. If you don't have a Perylene green, there, you can take Payne's Gray. Let's take Payne's Gray and add yellow to it. And that will give you a really good dark green. If it needs to be more of a blue-green, you can add more blue to that as well. So this is Payne's Gray, and I can add, let's add yellow to it. That turns it a dark green. But if I need a more bluish green, I can add more blue, and you can start adjusting it from there, right? So start with your basic green, then you can start flip-flopping into other colors that you want to sort of push the color towards. So if I want it more blue, I add more blue. Payne's Gray already has a lot of blue in it, which is why it makes a great shortcut for a dark green. Okay, that looks a little too... no, it's actually, I think it's looking okay. So I'm going to use this flat brush again. And I'm just going to come in with this flat brush and get the whole mass in there. We don't really see any of the detail on this tree other than the fact that it's got sort of several peaks. Still think that could be a little duller. I'm going to put a little more Payne's Gray into it. This is like really high contrast here. Don't want any of that blue showing from the water at the base. So I come right down to the grass. Okay, so I have that overall mass doesn't really have any details in it. I could hint at a little bit of light over here if I just take a damp brush and lift a little. I could hint at a couple of highlights in there. But most of this is going to get hidden, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time invested in that. But boom, that is such a dark color, right? Now, the coniferous tree here, to the right of that, is in front. The trunk does not look like it is brown to me. I mean, it might be, but it is so dark, it's very difficult to tell. So I'm going to take a little bit of my burnt sienna mixed with my green. And just get a basic area in there. Let's start here. Okay, so and I'm going to build the tree from the bottom up. So I'm going to go into my greens. Let's go a little bit lighter because it's not as dark as the one behind, so it's a little bit lighter. And I'm going to use this chisel brush once again, and or the chisel edge of my brush, I should say, and I'm coming in using the corner of the brush here to help create the little edges of the foliage. And you might be looking and going, oh, wait a minute, isn't that kind of pale? Well, it is, but I'm going to come in with a little bit more dark on some of these areas. So I'm really looking at the branches, the way that they either hang down or curve or stretch out, and which direction and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm doing this on top of the bit of trunk that I just put on there so that I don't have a straight line that shows through the foliage, because I'm using a more watery consistency paint here. And what's happening is that tree trunk is sort of blending into it, and then it doesn't look like it's a see-through tree, if you will. So let's see, where's the top of the tree here? The top of the tree goes way up into the blue. Obviously that has to come down and connect to the other part of the tree trunk. But let's get the basic shape in here, and then I'll refine. It gets pretty sparse near the top. It's really easy to go on autopilot and forget what you're doing when it comes to trees. But I'm looking at the branches, how they sort of cup in this upward motion. They're not poker straight. Just looking for little differences. That's, you know, that whole ability to paint is based on your ability to see. And the more sort of nuances you see, the more sort of accurate you could get with your values, with your shapes, with your directions, all of these things. Okay, so I'm sort of avoiding this for now. I'm kind of building up the tree around it. Sort of easing my way into the right shapes and whatnot. How far the branches should come out and that sort of thing. Need some more color, and I'm going to make this darker. So Payne's gray with a yellow, but I think it just needs to be a little bit duller. I'm going to put a little burnt sienna in it. And here's where I can start coming in, and I don't want to cover all of this. I want to come sort of underneath it, because I want the upper part of the branch facing the sky to look a little bit lighter. It might take a little bit of practice for you to work with a flat brush like this to create your trees, but it can give you some natural mark making that you wouldn't maybe otherwise get with just a round brush. Your tendency with a round brush is to actually paint everything. You'll notice I'm doing more of a dabble with this brush, with the chisel edge of the brush, to create the tree. So I'm not stroking with it so much as I'm just touching it to the paper. Now I have to still do some lifting out here. Let's hope that works. And this is pretty dense through here, so I'm going to fill in some of the gaps. There's some really solid type areas in through here. Particularly dense right in this area here, so I'm going to come in with a lot more color here and do that. Don't want to lose all of my lights. I still want to have some of those, but adding just a little more in between. I can certainly come in at the very end with, you know, a couple of details done with a small liner or something like that. But this is getting the bulk of the work done. And it does look more natural, I think, than I would do with just a round brush. There's these really dense areas right in the middle of where the tree trunk is there. That's most likely because of branches that are coming straight forward, like, you know, right at you kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to rinse my brush and blot it, and I'm going to see if I can lift out a few of the same, using the same chisel, and lift out a few lighter areas on this tree in the background, and I think it's going to work. Just make sure it connects to a branch. You don't want to have it just randomly done. And I still need some darks underneath those, just like I did everywhere else. So that makes the tree feel like it's in front now. I can only do this technique if both subjects are of similar or identical color. What about cat whiskers over black fur? I actually do have a video on that. One of a black cat video. If you go to my website, let me see. That's my website right there. There's a page called Free Online Demos, and basically it's all of these videos compiled and a link to just go. So you can look up that one if you want, or you can go to my page, my channel, and look up under the live tab, and just scroll through all of the lives I've done in the past, and you'll find the black cat. So doing black whiskers on a cat requires a little bit of, in that case I did some masking fluid. I believe I did masking fluid on that one. And I have a special way of doing that, so you have to look up that video to find out what that secret is. All right, so I've got that tree looking like it's in front now, and I just want to add in a few more bits on the side, so I'm going to use my smash brush and some brighter green. And I'm going to indicate some of the grassy or the bushy type plant here. Add in a few more darks. And then I'm going to take my rigger brush and some Payne's Gray, a little bit of burnt sienna, and add in a few branches from the from the curtain here over on the left hand side. And I love these sort of wiggly kind of branches that this tree has. All right, so maybe just a few more dabbles of greenery with the liner, the rigger, I should say, or liner would work. Just dabble, dabble, dabble. I'm not really making it too precise. Now I have, this tree should overlap this one a bit, so I'm going to have to lift out a little bit here. It needs to be a bit more golden because this tree is a different color than this one. So I'm going to take a little bit of that raw sienna and just paint a little raw sienna on top, and that will look like it's in front. So although we can't paint light on dark in watercolor, we can sometimes lift things out. I'm just reading some of the conversation here. I'm not sure how we got onto cats, but all right. So all in all, I'd say this one's pretty much done. I think I'm going to put a little more foliage and stuff back in here because I've just set up a bit of contrast here. Don't want to see the contrast at the edge of my paper. So I'm going to put in a little bit more greenery in through here to reduce that contrast. Little composition trick here. So I can disguise some of that contrast by adding a little bit more texture. Maybe even down here. Right, sort of kind of gives you a little bit more of a frame. We've got the dark of the water here framing on this side. We've got definitely got the dark trees here framing the left side. But it should feel at this point like it's really going off in the distance. This should feel far away, and I think it does. I might make a couple of adjustments to it, maybe a little bit more back in here. So for example, if I have a little bit more of a cast shadow on that hillside, it might show up a little bit more than I've got it. But I don't want to do anything in the background that's going to look really high contrast. That's going to just make it jump forward like crazy. You can always blot with your paper towel if you need to. And just a few dotted in trees. Just a little bit stronger contrast right there. So I didn't want to do that at the beginning because I knew that at the beginning that would sort of set the pace for everything else, and I'd have to go extra contrast everywhere else. But now that I see it's almost gone, I can put in a little bit more. But anyway, I hope you got a little bit out of that with my approach to some clouds back here, some texture, and working with a group of trees. Creating the distance, reflection, trees, grasses. There was a lot involved here, but there's certainly simpler approaches that you can take to this. But I think overall, this area here, the water area, is what really comes out for me. I think I'm going to come into this a little bit more too. This little area here, I'm going to bring a branch in there or something through there. Pull that off. I'll put some raw sienna in here, and it can be with a little bit of green, but the raw sienna is a little bit semi-opaque, so it'll do a pretty good job of painting on top of this. There we go. So now that kind of disguises that strong shape there on the left even more. So there we go, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me just come back for a second and say thank you so much for joining me once again. I will be back again next week at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That is on Wednesdays. So we'll see you then. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great week.